Open source, open source, open source. One of the most important two terms in a language of English if you are a developer right now that you should contribute because you will get a good opportunity, and that is reality. Majority of the companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple are now focusing on open source because it is helping the industry. But the question is, I'm a fresher right now, I'm a student, I'm a third year student, I'm a fourth year student. How would I actually contribute to an open source project? What are the different terminology around it? And how can I make sure the contribution I'm making is actually helping me? Because if I talk about in terms of open source projects, not everyone is accepted for their contribution. So let's try to understand what we are going to discuss. So first of all, what is open source? See, basically open source is something where you can see what is happening. So let's say if you have written an algorithm which is going to say 2 plus 2 equals to 4, you can see that. How Instagram is suggesting you a post, you cannot see that, you can just make an assumption. But how a language like Node.js, how a language like PHP, how a language like Ruby, if I talk about, is going to work can be seen on their open source repository. So this is the difference here. You can actually see what is happening in the code, and if you want, you can actually make contribution and nobody is going to punish you because this is available freely. So this is what open source stands for. Now next is, why should I actually contribute to open source? If it is free, it is not going to pay me. So obviously this question you should ask when you are a developer and you have 10 years of experience. You should not ask this question if you're a student right now. Let me tell you why. Because it helps you find mentors if you need one. So basically what will happen, let's say if you're contributing to a certain project, they will see, okay, he's a student right now, he or she is a student right now, and they're contributing to the project. So this is very great, let me help them out. Secondly, you learn new skills. So you can see it will actually help you learn new skills and obviously improve existing skills if I talk about, because open source wants you to contribute in a best way possible, and this is only possible when you're going to give your best. So obviously when you're giving your best, you actually learn new things or improve your existing skills if I talk about. Now you will also gain a much deeper knowledge about the if I talk about the project if you're using, or maybe the software you're using, because obviously you will be learning new skill sets and various things are happening. So this point is going to give you more importance, because obviously when you look for a potential job or internship if I talk about, so they will find out that you actually have a good knowledge. And finally, build up your reputation to help you grow your career. Now obviously if you're a student right now, if you don't have any experience right now, this is one of the gold I would say you can steal right now, because obviously if you have one or two names, one or two projects under your name where you have contributed as a contributor and they are open source, obviously this is going to give you a huge boost compared to so many different things. Fine. Now let's understand how I should be choosing a project if I talk about, because what happens, there are so many projects and obviously we are going to make a video on that as well, which projects you should be contributing. But how will I find which project to contribute and which project not to contribute? So first of all, try to see what kind of a license they have. So check the license file, because license file is going to mention what kind of a license that open source project has. Okay, because otherwise this is going to be a very difficult thing for you, because some open source projects do not allow you to do certain things. Secondly, check how regularly it is committed. So basically what happens if I talk about in terms of open source, so maybe a developer has some different priorities, maybe the company has different priorities, so they actually abandon the project. So you have to check when the last commit was made so that you can understand how serious the contributors are for this particular project. Now look at the number of contributors, obviously how many people are contributing, and check how often people make commits. So obviously this is a point which you can understand, not only when the last commit was made, but how often people are committing. Now one thing which I want to mention here is, obviously we did not mention here, is check the company profile if I talk about. Company or the original contributors profile. Why? Because basically what happens, that particular developer or a company has the responsibility towards that. So if they are contributing full time, if the company is very big, so obviously this is going to help you enhance, or I would say choose a right project if I talk about. Okay, now obviously if I talk about in terms of the information or the terminology, so what is a license? License is basically a way where people are sharing information how you can use the particular piece of code if I talk about. Then we have a term like a README file. What is a README file? README file is technical instruction manual, how you will be contributing to the particular project. So README file will have all kind of instructions which are required for you. Now obviously that depends upon developer to developer what kind of an data, or I would say what kind of a content they want to put in a README file. But yes, often it is included. It is actually a manual with all the requirements if I talk about for contributing to the project and steps to take the contribution if I talk about. Then we have also contribution guideline. Now please read these contribution guidelines if I talk about very carefully. Why? Because they are going to tell you how you can actually make, or I would say improve the particular piece of project if I talk about, because otherwise that is going to create a huge issue. So follow the contribution guideline because that is only going to enhance your skill set. And obviously code of conduct. So how you should be conducting. So basically if it is a people-oriented project, so you have to understand there are so many people coming from different regions and different genders if I talk about, different demographics. So you have to understand, you have to follow all the guidelines related to code of conduct so that it becomes a good experience for everyone, not just for you. Now obviously how would I find, I would say how would I start contributing to an open source project? So let's try to understand how we would be contributing to an open source project. So first of all, you have to understand that you have to add a proper description to the project's documentation to explain a certain point. Now these are the points where you will be contributing, but you have to understand whatever implementation you're doing. I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you want to add 2 plus 2 equals to 4. Now you have named one variable as 1 and one variable as 3. Now it is wrong or it is correct, that is totally up to you. But if the person is trying to read this piece of code, can they understand what is the meaning of 1? What is the meaning of 3? This is technically, if I talk about, these are PHP variables if I talk about. Okay, so try to understand. If the person who is going to read your code can read it thoroughly, they will be able to understand it. They will even be able to give you suggestions or maybe implement something out of it. So make your code readable, add proper descriptions if I talk about, add proper comments if I talk about. This is only going to help you. Secondly, give guidance on specific projects and how to use it. So obviously if you have implemented something, give the proper guidance, give the proper how to if I talk about. Then add sample output to show how code works. So this is very important. Try to understand open source project is an open source project, but ultimately a human being is going to contribute on that. So make sure you are actually helping them with the sample output if I may. And finally, write in-depth tutorial for the project. This is something which is very important if I talk about. Not just the project if I talk about, but also the kind of contribution you have made. So maybe if you have made something, or maybe you have implemented something, like let's say you have added a feature. So if you can give a proper documentation, proper tutorial on that, how people can use it. So this is only going to help you gain credibility if I talk about for this particular project. And obviously make sure you have the translations available for the project. So basically what happens, some projects are available in English, some projects are available in Spanish. In India, some projects are available in Tamil or maybe Malayalam. So try to understand if you're going to give a proper translation so everyone can contribute. Otherwise, what happens if a person is not speaking that certain language, they won't be able to contribute or maybe understand the project. Then answer questions. Now this is something which is very important. If a person has a question related to the changes you have made to the project, or maybe you have created an open source project, so you have to understand that you are answering those queries. Okay, you can also offer mentorship to another contributor. So obviously as a student, if I have gained some expertise, if I have gained some knowledge, if I contributing a lot, so obviously I can help them. And finally, fix typos and arrange the project work folder correctly. Now this is a very important skill. This actually falls into the category of clean code. Okay, this actually falls into the category of clean code. So try to understand that this is going to be very important at the longer run. How clean your code is actually going to help you get a proper job or get a proper recommendation, because when they will see a clean code, they will be actually quite interested in what you can do. Okay, now obviously if you have some questions related to this video, if I talk about, comment section is the right place for you to ask the questions. I have some questions with me, so which I'm going to answer right now. How do I contribute to open source project on GitHub? Obviously you have to reach out to the various contributors who are contributing to that particular project. The best option is obviously making a pull request, with which you can actually easily, quite easily get your pull request accepted. Then how do I find open source projects on GitHub? See, GitHub is basically a repository, or I would say it is a search engine for all the open source projects. So obviously the best way for you to do that is choose a language. Let's say you want to use Node.js, and look for all repositories which are using Node.js and start contributing. It's that simple. How can I manage open source projects? So obviously you can use GitHub, but try to understand one thing with management. You don't have to do everything there. There are so many people who would like to actually work with you and contribute to that particular project. Now, obviously, if I have not answered any one of your questions, you can put that in the comment section. So in conclusion, I would say this is how you would be contributing to an open source project, but try to understand as a student, you have to focus on this part, because this is going to give you a worldwide recognition, if I talk about, compared to just specific recognition across similar companies, or I would say small companies. So with this, how you can contribute to this particular open source project, if I talk about, is over. If you have any questions, obviously put that in the comment section of this particular video. And if you like to join our exclusive Telegram groups for third year students and final year students and pre-final year students, we have all those specific groups. All the links are available in the description of this video. So with this, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.